Welcome back to the AI for Good Global Summit here in Geneva, and I'm delighted now to be joined by Gabriela Ramos, who's the Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO. Good to have you. Now, Gabriela,
Thanks for the invitation, Chris.
everybody knows UNESCO because of the heritage sites and cultural protection of amazing artifacts around the world. What's the link with AI?
Well, first and foremost, AI touches upon all of those issues: education and culture, and how do we preserve heritage sites, how we do control them. But UNESCO has an S in its name, which is related to science. And I'm heading the social and human sciences. And I will tell to your public, if the S was not there, it would be UNESCO, and nobody will know what it is. So therefore, is the institution that is promoting the use of science for the betterment of our societies. And I am in particular in charge of the social and human sciences, and it includes the ethics of science. And we have been working on applying this ethical framework to all major developments of technological breakthroughs, starting with the human genome, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, neurotech. And therefore, I think this is a very important role that we have, including in brokering international agreements for countries to advance these developments in an ethical way.
I mean, you're playing a role, I guess, in the standardization of the process, right?
Yeah, in 2021, for example, we managed to get 193 countries to sign to the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. And then we were very glad because the US decided to rejoin UNESCO, particularly for that piece of work. And it's pretty straightforward because the ethical framework is not just a reflection on the moral grounds of what is good for humanity, but it's also translating it into the alignment with the human rights, human dignity, fair outcomes, sustainable outcomes, reducing inequalities. But that's, let's say, like the big picture. Then you need to translate that into very concrete objectives of accountability, responsibility, transparency. And we know that those words, because we have been discussing them for many years. What matters for us and what is also included in the recommendation is specific policy chapters, governing data better, creating data trust, ensuring quality of data, ensuring that we are sharing data because it's highly concentrated. The question of how do you use technologies in the health sector, the future of work, labor markets impact, children, gender, environment. Because what happens is that artificial intelligence, even though there is a debate if it is already a general purpose technology or not, is everywhere. And therefore we need to think how we ensure that this is not a technological conversation, not about the technology, but how do we ensure that the technology help us achieve our goals as humanity.
From the UNESCO's point of view, how can you impose? I mean, I guess you can't impose, you have to get everyone to agree. How do you do that? Because it's so many different issues: technology, human rights, equality, inequality in front of the digital divide. How does UNESCO kind of get everyone around the table and say, okay, we agree to these?
Well, first and foremost, I think that member states are always counting on international institutions, and particularly UNESCO with the scientific part, to get the evidence. And if you go to members and you tell them, well, let me tell you this very negative impact that technology is having in our youth, because there is this sense of loneliness, even though they are connected all the time, or gender as being discriminated. Women, we know that they are really harassed in the cyberspace in a higher degree than men, or if you show that technologies are really augmenting the trends that are worrisome to all of us on inequalities, on lack of transparency, on power imbalances, big tech holding a lot of power, concentration, because there are 2 countries and few firms that produce 80% of these technologies. So first and foremost, get the evidence right. And second, get to agree on what do you do. What do you do for gender, for example? If we say that only 22% of the workforce in the sector are women, well, you get some affirmative action. It's not that difficult to do it. But then what we get is to put the evidence, to get the tools, and then to work with member states. Of course, Greece. Member states are the ones that define if they want to advance fast or not. But I'm happy to tell you that in the recommendation, we also advanced an implementation plan with assessment by country, a readiness assessment to know where each country is. I have now 50 countries that have asked us to do the assessment to know where they are in terms of their capacities to implement the recommendation. And you get countries there from the Dutch and the competent authorities in the European Union that we are aligning with the AI Acts, to Brazil and South Africa and the G20 countries, Indonesia, to Malawi, Mozambique, Uruguay. We have the regional groups that are discussing the issues. So we also provide a platform like the AI for Good, where countries come together to discuss. We have a global forum on the ethics of AI. So it's very practical, because we're not going to be telling countries what they need to do, but we will tell them, oh, have you seen, let's see, what about the risk-based approach of the European Union? Does that work? Why don't we go better like the executive order of the US? Because they're talking about ex-ante assessment, which is something that we always say, because you don't launch products in the market without assessing their impact. And therefore, I think this is a process of multilateral cooperation that I feel is delivering good. And at the end, when we negotiated the recommendation 3 years ago, countries thought that we were crazy, because it's ethics. Why do we need ethics? We need technologies. Now the conversations have changed with generative AI and ChatGPT. Leaders got very worried. And it was almost like a blessing in disguise, because now we are getting serious about the governance of the technology.
That's really interesting, and that gets me to my last point. Everyone's now worried at government levels everywhere about addiction of mobile phones for young people, how they just are losing their concentration. AI is probably going to make them even more addicted, right? That must be something you're looking at as well, right? How youth are just completely hooked in.
Well, first and foremost, I think that we need to change the conversation, because we're always looking at the technologies. If you ask me, this addictive threat that we have with the iPhones and the young people and all the social networks, there are ways technologically to reduce that dependency. And actually, yesterday I was talking with one of the participants who was saying the scrolling down and the fastest way in which this is done triggers some endorphins that then get the people connected and they need to continue. Mm-hmm. If you slow down that, they will disconnect. It's proven. If you make it more difficult to be scrolling down and getting more information, then at some point they get worried. And so technologically it's possible, but that's not the point. The point exactly is to get at the higher level and say, do we want these technologies to be harming our youth like that? No, we don't. So who is the one that has the duty of care? Are we going to ask the companies, could you please be kind enough and not do that? No. You have the government who has a duty of care. You have the legal frameworks and the rules. And we should not shy away to our responsibility, policymakers and governments, to put the frameworks. And therefore, for youth, or deepfakes, what is the US considering now about deepfakes? To ban them. Why don't we ban them? So there are very specific issues, and the purpose here is not to go for a very general conversation, but to go as detailed and as very concrete in terms of how do we tackle the different aspects of these technologies. But then the most important issue is how you build the ecosystem of incentives. I'm an economist, and I come from the policy field, not from the technological field. I can see financial sector, energy sector, AI sector. You can introduce the incentives to get more investments in the good technologies than in the bad ones. And not only that, you can criminalize when things go wrong, so that people have also the incentives to behave well. We have the tools. The only point is not simple, because it's a very dynamic and disruptive sector. But at the end, I think there's no other way than framing it ethically.
Gabriela, I know there's one thing you want to talk about. It's neurotech.
Yeah, because there are converging technologies. And now UNESCO is working to also produce an instrument on the ethics of neurotech. Neurotech are all these technologies that to read your brain. It's good because in the medical field, it might produce very great breakthroughs. When you combine it with artificial intelligence, all the neural data that is being gathered to profile people for good and for bad is very worrisome. And it's worrisome because it's another technological breakthrough that has not really thought how to frame it in the right way. You, Chris, you don't know what kind of signals you're sending when you interact with the technology, and how you can also be profiled, because the fact that misinformation is so effective is because they have already classified people in certain ways depending on the information that they get. And the most sensitive one is neural data. And we need to frame that right.
Gabriela Ramos from UNESCO, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks to you, Chris.
And do stay with us here because we have so much more coming up here on the AI for Good Global Summit.